Welcome to Ray's Reflection, the Common Man's Bible Study. Today we are at chapter 18 of the Gospel of John. And we are going to begin to study the Passion of Jesus Christ. Before we start, I'd like to take a moment and wish my condolences and my encouragement and my hellos to a dear friend who we saw yesterday, who is going to see the Lord very shortly, and we wish him well, and we know, Lord, that he is looking anxiously for that moment, as we all are. So this hopefully will be dear to him. Before I start this, I want to lay down some ground rules. When you are making a Bible study, if you are studying, you have to be very careful that in your study you don't lose your direction. And what I mean by that is this particular passage, as you read the events that occurred in Jesus Christ, John has left a great many of those events out. And you might at first believe that maybe John doesn't know all of the events, etc. And we know from studying the scriptures that he not only knows all of the events, but he was there. And we see it in verse 16. He says this, but Peter, verse 15, he says, and Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. And throughout the gospel, whenever he refers to the other disciple, he's referring to himself. And therefore he was there when these events were occurring. Yet he does not record all of the events. If you want to learn the chronological order of the night and the events up to the crucifixion, then you would read the Gospel of Matthew, Luke, and Mark, and you would get the chronological, you would get all the events, and you could put them all in pieces. And what you would be studying would be the chronological events. This is not what John is writing about. If you remember when we started teaching the Gospel of John, we told you that John had a purpose for writing this. And the purpose was to show that Jesus Christ was God. That was its purpose. And the chronological events of the night do not show that Jesus Christ was God until you take certain aspects of that chronology and study those things. And this is what John did. John listed the events that made him be the Son of God, that showed him to be the Son of God. And therefore we must not lose this in our study. So therefore there will be things that you know that occurred that night that John is very silent on. Or he may mention the event, but he may mention a particular aspect of the event and leave other details out, because the other details don't meet his goal in teaching about Jesus Christ being the Son of God. So we keep that in mind as we go through this, and therefore you will get the proper study of the Gospel of John. Let's begin, and it says this, when Jesus had spoken these words, the words were the last four lessons that I taught you, which was the Lord's Prayer. When he had finished these words, he went forth with his disciples over the brook of Kidron, where was a garden into which he entered and his disciples. Now, if you look here, I have on the PowerPoint a map. The Kidron Valley is right here. Now, this is the temple area, etc. The Kidron Valley runs right here. And that doesn't show you well what it is, but if I'm going to give you a cross-section, you will see how deep a ravine it is. This is a cross-section of that. And the Garden of Gethsemane would be right about here. It would be just high enough up the mountain so that you could look over into the temple area. But you will notice how deep a ravine this was. So you can see that And if you were in the Garden of Gethsemane, you can see that from the garden to the temple isn't a very big walk. It's maybe a 15-minute walk. So therefore, this is where he retired. Now, why would he go there? The other Gospels teach us that Jesus Christ went there quite often. He went there quite often. And we must understand that between the time Judas was asked to leave the supper and do what he was supposed to do, to the time of this departure, Judas had already made a deal with the Sanhedrin to sell his knowledge of where Jesus was and who Jesus was and how to capture him and where to capture him to the Sanhedrin for 30 pieces of silver. And therefore, this was going on in the background, and John doesn't mention this. This is what's going on in the background. Now, Jesus prays, and then he leaves. Now, think about this. He knows what Judas knows. He knows that Judas is going to get the high priest and as many people as possible as he can come. We will see how many people he brought. And he knows that Judas is going to go to the Garden of Gethsemane because that is where Jesus normally went at nights when he was in Jerusalem. He would go into the city proper during the day, etc., and at night he would retire to the garden and to this olive garden. Therefore, it became quite convenient. So now, if you were a person who was in leadership position and you knew that someone was going to betray you and that someone was going to bring your adversaries to the place where you frequented quite often, human nature tells you that you would avoid that place. That's what it would tell you. But Jesus not only did not avoid that place, he beat Judas there and literally was waiting for Judas to show up. Which, according to John, shows that this event is scripted. It's like a play. It's like a play that has already been written out. And we can find the play, the scenes, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4 of this play, and all the scenes laid out for us in the Old Testament. And what is happening is the players on the scene are simply acting out a pre-written scene, a pre-written play. And this play was written before the foundations of the earth. And only God could carry out this plan. And only God could carry out what was pre-written. And therefore, Christ was supposed to be arrested in this garden, and therefore he went to that garden waiting. In other words, he's carrying out the scene. He's carrying out the scene which he and the Father had written well before the foundations of the earth. Now, as you go further, you'll see this. It says, and Judas also, who betrayed him, knew the place, for Jesus often resorted there with his disciples. So both parties know about this. And then it says, Judas then, having received a band of men and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, cometh there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Now the cohorts that were with Jesus, or with Judas rather, how many people showed up to arrest Jesus? You would think that if you were going to arrest this band of 12 people and their leader, or there would be 11 people now because Judas is traded, so that there'd be a total of 12 people there. If you were going to arrest him, etc., you wouldn't need very many people. I mean, 100 people would take care of it. The Roman legion that went with Judas was about 600 men. Then you had the temple soldiers, or the temple guards, and they were ranked about 200 men. And then obviously you had other followers. So when you look at the group of people that showed up to arrest Jesus, You see somewhere close to 1,000 people. That's an awful lot of people just to go and arrest one person. And the conclusion we can come up with is that the day before, or a few days before, they had seen Jesus march into Jerusalem, and they had seen almost 400,000 people lining the streets. And therefore, they were going to bring enough men just in case the 400 people raised their heads and decided this was not the right thing to do. So therefore they made sure they had the power to resist and still arrest Jesus in the face of this. So when we look at it that way, we see that 1,000 was not that big a company. Now, you'll notice the players, there was the chief priests, the religious leaders, and the Pharisees. Obviously, the religious leaders were the ones whom were constantly confronting Jesus, and now they were angry, and a number of times they attempted to kill him, and now they're coming to do just that. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things, stop right there. When I told you earlier that he was playing out a scene, this is what he's playing out. He knows all things. That should come upon him. In other words, he's going to carry out the Father's plan. It says, went forth and said unto them, whom seek ye? He knew who they were seeking, but he wanted them to say it. And they answered him, and they said, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus said unto them, I am he. Simple words, isn't it? But I want you to notice the first two. The first two words are, I am. That's the name of God. And I think here in I have the King James Version, it has I am in small letters, in lowercase. I think it should be in uppercase to be appropriate because of the action that followed. And therefore, I think it would be the same thing, that same name he used when Moses asked him who he would tell the Egyptian had sent him. And he said, I am that I am. That was his name. I am is his name. And therefore, I think the I should be, here is uppercase. I think the AM should have been uppercase. And I say that not because of the sentence, but because of the reaction to the sentence. And he says, I am he. And Judas also, who betrayed him, stood with them. Now, as soon then as he had said unto them, I am he, they went backwards and fell on the ground. Just those words, just the fact that he said his name, so powerful that 1,000 men fell on their backs. Think about that. If there was proof that one man was God, isn't that enough proof? And if you were in that contingency, wouldn't you pick up your sword and run back home? No, I'm not going to face this guy. He spoke and knocked me right down. See, I think there's a script here. And whether they realize it or not, that script is being played out not by just Jesus. That script is being played out by these men also. So ignoring what has just happened to them, they continue. Because the script said they must continue. And then it says this, they fell to the ground. Then asked he them again, whom seek ye? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. And he answered, I have told you that I am he. In other words, I told you. Therefore you seek me, let these go their way. Now, why would he say that? Why would he say, let these go their way? Obviously, he's protecting the 11 disciples that are left. Now, they may sound strange, but let's go back to the prayer. Do you remember the prayer? The prayer, I'm going to bring that up a couple of times. He prayed. And what did he pray? If you go back to verse 17, if you go back verse 12 of chapter 17, he's praying and he says this, while I was with them in the world, I kept them in thy name. And those that thou gavest me, I have kept, and none of them is lost, but the son of perdition, that the scriptures might be fulfilled. Therefore, you cannot arrest these 11 people. Why? Because I have prayed that none of them is lost. I have kept them. Now here's the catch. When he prayed that, was he praying in the will of God? And the answer is, well, yes, he was praying in the will of God. He was God. Therefore, every prayer that is made in the will of God is answered. Therefore, every prayer, that prayer that he made, every bit of that prayer is answered. Therefore, while he was in the world, and he's still in the world, he kept them, therefore they had to be kept. It's as simple as that. It's not more difficult. And therefore he looks at them and he says, let these go their way. It also includes the fulfillment of Scripture. And he said that the saying might be fulfilled which he spoke, of them whom thou gavest me, I have lost none. That comes right out of his prayer in chapter 17, the Lord's Prayer. And therefore, he has lost none of them. So they scattered, as the Scripture said, they scattered and left, except for just a few. Then, look, here's where we get this picture. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it, and smote the high priest's servant, and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. In other words, Peter is going to protect his leader. So he, without thinking, attacks the first person, I'm sure, closest to him, and he cuts the man's ear off. Now, let's take a look at the statement. Then said Jesus unto Peter, put up thy sword into thy sheath. The cup which my Father has given me, shall I not drink of it? There is no mention here of Christ picking that ear up and putting it back on Marcus or Malchus and healing that man. No mention of it here. Yet the other Gospels teach us that Jesus reached down, picked that ear up, and put it back and healed it so that Malchus looked as if he was completely healed. And if you read some of the comments that are made about that, etc., they'll expound the fact that Jesus is God, he created the miracle, and he did. And they'll expound the fact that he had great compassion on even his enemies. Why didn't John mention that then? If that was such a great cause, why didn't John mention that here? Because that wasn't the role of God. That wasn't the role of Jesus being God. Performing the miracle would not be any greater than him speaking and knocking down 1,000 men. So therefore, there must be another reason. And if you go back to verse 9, there is the reason. Of them whom thou gavest me, I have lost none. That comes directly out of the prayer in John 17. Now, listen carefully. If things were to progress as normal without this intervention of the ear healing, if it was going to progress, Peter would have been arrested for assaulting one of the high priest's servant and cutting off his ear. And because of that action, Peter, the next day, would have been hanging on a cross with Jesus Christ. He would have been tried and condemned for what he did. So, in order for the phrase, of them whom thou gavest me, have I lost none, to be fulfilled, Jesus had to remove that offense. So he picks up that ear, puts it back on Malchus, and now there is no offense that exists. So by doing so, what Jesus is doing is he is protecting Peter. And he's acting on behalf of Peter to remove the offense. And that, people, is a picture of what is going on today in the life of Jesus. He is going to do what is required to remove the offense from mankind. He's going to pay the price that the offense of mankind's sin, the sins that mankind has committed. that offense, he's going to remove it by offering himself as a sacrifice for its payment. And that little picture is given to us there. But on Peter's part, Peter does not realize what he is doing by attacking Malchus. Peter, without knowing it, is trying to stop the play, as I told you, the scenes, the controlled written script by God the Father from being carried out. And this is what Jesus says to him. The cup which my Father has given me, shall I not drink it? In other words, but the Father has written a script, and he has given me a duty. And my responsibility here is to be crucified and pay for the sins of man, to remove the offense of mankind from the face of God Almighty. And you are going to stop it, am I? Am I not the one to fulfill this? And this Peter did not know. He's been with Jesus for 3 years. And for 3 years, he's been told this he's going to have to be crucified. He's come here to save that which was lost, and on and on and on. And if anyone should have known the plan of Jesus Christ, it should have been Peter. And it wasn't. He didn't understand it. So that's why he healed the servant, took and healed that ear, to remove the offense that Peter had created so that Peter would not be lost. And therefore the prayer that Jesus prayed. Now, study the prayer. We went through it for 4 weeks. You study the prayer, because everything Jesus prayed for occurred. And he prayed for you and me. He did. He prayed for you and me. And therefore, that prayer is coming true. It is true today. Then when the band and the captains and the officers of the Jews took Jesus, they bound him. Why in the world do they have to bind him? Because the script says so. And they led him away to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was a high priest that same year. Now, you have to remember, in the Old Testament, when a high priest became a high priest, he was the high priest for life. And the Romans did not like that all that power concentrated in one person. So therefore, they would nominate another high priest to take his place. But regardless, in the background, Annas was still the high priest. So he brings him to Annas the high priest. Now Caiaphas was he who had given counsel to the Jews that it was expedient for one man should die for the people. Isn't it interesting that Caiaphas earlier, when Christ was marching into Jerusalem, in the background, Caiaphas said that one man should die for the people. In other words, he was not looking at Jesus Christ dying for the sins of man. He was saying, look, if the Jews get together and follow this man, the Romans will take our power away because we're no longer effective. He will take our place away. Therefore, it would be expedient if we kill that man, because it would be obviously expedient that this one man should die so that the nation would be saved. And therefore, that's what he's dealing with. Now, Jesus Christ is going to come before Annas. And next week we will talk about the conversation and what transpired between them, and as Jesus moved from one person to another person. But you must remember this. What is going on is illegal in the Jewish system. You don't arrest anyone at night. You don't have any trials at night. And this is occurring slightly before, somewhere after midnight, and between midnight and 3 o'clock. That's all occurring between that time. And this violates Jewish law. So therefore, what is happening here is illegal. But if you look at the history of Christianity, every time persecution occurred, even under the name of legality, of laws and the powers that be, all of it was illegal. It continues to be illegal. There is no legal foundation, lawful legal foundation, that okays the killing of Christians, and as this case, okayed the killing of Christ, except one. And that is that God the Father has scripted this, and Jesus Christ is going to see it through, scene by scene by scene by scene. He is God. He is in control. Don't take your eyes off that. Do not ever, ever make Jesus a victim. He is not a victim. He is the God who scripted the scenes. And now he is acting out those scenes. That was done for you and me. And therefore we must not ever forget that. It is not rogue mankind that overcame Jesus and made Jesus a victim. That just didn't happen that way. And this is what John is trying to teach us by leaving out the details that don't deal with that issue. So until next week, when we continue the passion of Jesus, I bid you Godspeed from On Victory's Side. See you next week.